Hello, all. This is Matt Faulkner. I'm here with my friend
Eugene Clark.
Dun, dun, dun. Oh yeah, what's our theme song this week?
Eugene, Matt and Huge. They're two really groovy dudes.
Scooby Dooby Doo. Here's the story
So
of a guy named.
if after that theme song you're still willing to watch this,
Yeah, we're here for you. Okay, Save
hey,
World, Make Art.
This is our Save World Make Art podcast, video podcast. And I'm Eugene Clark, your roving reporter, here to talk to Matt Faulkner. You know, Matt, our very last episode, we did touch on fine arts and illustration, the two worlds colliding. What is it all about? You know, we'd like to go back to that for a minute and just pose the question to you as a quote unquote illustrator artist. How do you see the fine arts part of it coming into play? Is that a good way to pose that question?
When you said fine arts and illustration, I thought and the coming together. What does that look like? It looks like us.
It looks like us.
Yeah, because
That's
we get to do. We were saying beforehand, right? We get to do whatever we want to do. Okay, that's one of the things of being self-employed. Now, the question that you've put before me, and it's a good question, Eugene. How does fine art play into my process as an illustrator? Is that another way to put it?
Sure. I mean, just like you're first and foremost, I think the way I see what we do is under the heading of artist, and when you finally come to terms with that word and say it with conviction, like I'm an artist, because there were times in my life where I didn't say that. And for whatever reason, I felt like, oh, maybe I shouldn't say this out loud because people are going to look down at me, or they're going to look like, what are you talking about? And, and all that has happened. But at some point you take ownership of it. You do have a background of being an illustrator through all of the wonderful books that you've created. But yet there's this thing, this little, it's an ingredient. It's called fine arts. Yeah. What does it mean to you?
Well, I had a chip on my shoulder about it from college because it was indicated that fine art was, hence the word fine, that's real art, and illustration were people, quote unquote, whoring their talents, which, and they played it up there, and the students played it up, people bought into it. I've even had people still who, well, I won't go into that, but, it's still part of, I think, my generation, that we were the children of Jackson Pollock, not literally, but that movement that said postmodernistic art is the quintessential expression as an artist. And so the teachers who taught us were all about that. I really found like that hard to be like, why buy into that? Well, and one of the things for me too is that fine artist, as I look at it today, is simply somebody who pays attention and is not afraid to make choices. That's it. They're not constricted. Now, as an illustrator, I'll get a contract. Somebody asks me to draw something in a certain way. Those are constrictions, but within that, I still have the ability to express. It's limited as compared to somebody who's a fine artist like you, because you can wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to make artwork with fill in the blank and about fill in the blank. And within that too, there also can be constrictions, but there is a difference. The illustrator is given that direction right up front. I'll say one other thing about it too, is that having the school that I went to, I remember I visited a former classmate when I was right out of college. And she and her partner had just like put tiles up in their bathroom, and the tiles were really funky looking. I was like, what? Where'd they get these tiles? They're really cool. They had said, check out our bathroom when you go in there. It's really cool. We just, or something like this. I came out and I was like, where'd you get these tiles? They're really weird. And she said, oh, and she had one of them and she flipped it over in her hand and she said, see, this is the face of the tile, When we turned it over, the backside, which is designed in a certain way to catch the glue, looked really cool. It has a really funky pattern on it. So we said, that's the side we're going to put outward. Okay. Now, to me, that's a fine art mentality. I don't care what they put in front of me. I'm going to make what resonates for me. Okay.
Wow.
So that's why, for me, this whole thing of fine art versus illustration, like I said before, it's just a competition set up by people who are trying to make money based upon a hierarchy. Yeah. And it doesn't need to be that way. And it isn't that way. So I'm going to turn the question back around for you. You're a fine artist. You're a teacher who teaches the tenets of fine art, drawing and anatomy, the underlying structure of how you become a fine artist. You have to understand these systems. You teach that, as well as fine art painting. How does illustration, the idea of taking an idea from a story perhaps, or any kind of story, could be a very limited story, and making something out of that, how does that fit into the work that you do as a fine artist?
Well, thank you, Matt Faulkner, for asking that question.
You're very welcome.
One of my favorite all-time artists that I studied in art history class, and then sort of, out of art history class, because I was interested in the human figure, I wanted to study more. It was Michelangelo. And, over time, looking at the Sistine Chapel ceiling and even going to visit it live in Rome, a couple occasions, I came to recognize that that's some of the greatest illustration of all time, in terms of something that's so well known. And not only that, but the content of those paintings comes from a book that's probably, the book that has sold the most copies of all time, the Bible. And, when you take this master artist and this subject matter that's so widely read, and you bring them together and you have this end result, you can't help but think about the word illustration and where it fits into that. Because I think, until you do that, Michelangelo, because of being taught in art history and the way that we bring him up, he's looked at as a fine artist. And so, I use Michelangelo, for me personally, to help me to take the understanding of both fine arts and illustration and bridge the gap. Okay. So that's how I see illustration fitting into my world. I'm following in the footsteps of someone like Michelangelo, just because I choose to see it that way. And I therefore found myself in my first year of teaching, out of what was my whole world, which was the fine arts department of my college, I was thrust into the illustration department as a teacher. I've got illustration students, and I'm a person that, up to that point, my world was fine arts. And how do you deal with that? I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to come across as valid in the world of these young, quote unquote, illustration students. And I had to really find a common ground. Yeah. So I think that common ground is good principles of color theory, anatomy, drawing principles, perspective, all those things that I had been learning in fine arts. Come to find out, they're important in illustration. They're no less important, I should say, in the world of illustration than in fine arts. So, when you talk about Jackson Pollock, which at the time that I was in fine arts at CCS, of course, we talked about him a lot. We talked about this one guy who was a sculptor named Donald Judd, who was very, minimalist sculpture. He even came to the school at the time, so I got to meet him. Pollock is that, abstract expressionist, splattery paint. And then if you take away any and all evidence of anything, you have Donald Judd, which is this large plates of steel boxes, you know, or just plates welded next to each other. And minimal is the word. So here, you know, I'm influenced and being taught by people that that's where they want to go. But yet I had this core understanding of this need and desire to want to learn how to draw, want to learn how to paint realistically and learn all those principles of foundation. So when I got into teaching and illustration, man, I actually felt more at home to some degree because these kids were hungry for it. And that has not changed in 30 years time of teaching.
Right.
In fact, I feel like even more so, not just in illustration, but the fact that because of the internet, and I tell my illustration students this all the time, and entertainment art students, look, you're not just an illustrator or an entertainment artist. You are also a fine artist, because the internet gives you the ability to now promote your work and have access to not only display your work and present it in, you know, the field that you're getting your degree in, but also in galleries.
Yeah.
And to have exhibitions, which at the time that I was a student, you would never go into an art gallery and see the work on display, a whole gallery of someone that was an illustrator. It just didn't happen.
Yep.
So since then to now, that's completely changed.
Yeah.
There is no divide. So,
well, there are people who are still invested in that. There are people who are still want to. I recognize that you say that there's no divide, and I don't think that there is either. But I have to say that I know that there are people who are still want to believe that there is that divide between illustration and fine art, right? Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, and like you said earlier, if there's ways to make money and you know, jump on this bandwagon, then you're going to do it. If you're a critic or a collector or a curator, those are the big three, then you're going to decide, you know, what is our slant for this or that so that we can come out on top. But, you know, I think last time we talked about Norman Rockwell and how I saw his work in the Historical Museum in Chicago. And then later on, the DIA has a show in a fine arts museum. That's a great example. I think another example is the Wyeth family, where you have N.C. Wyeth, who illustrated so many wonderful books. And then his son, Andrew, who I learned about Andrew before NC. You know, Andrew was one of those people that in art history class, you always see that painting that he did of the girl on the hill who, you know, was sort of seated with her legs spread out because she was crippled, and so she couldn't walk. That's the story behind the whole thing. But it's such a famous painting. And then the whole Helga series and all that kind of stuff. You know, and then out of that and my love for that work and how it was presented, then comes NC for me. And maybe because I'm in the illustration world and I'm hearing these names, I'm like, NC Wyeth, but there's Andrew. What? They're related, you know? And then you start to see how NC survived, but he had all of these amazing, like you look at his paintings and you see what you see in a Michelangelo painting, you know? I mean, to me, it's all that, or a Velasquez, you know, or, you know, Titian, you know, any of these painters that are recognized as this higher level sort of painting. That was what was going on in here. And so it made total sense to think that Andrew, following in those footsteps, then became the type of painter that he was.
Okay, I'm going to.
And then Jamie, not to mention Jamie.
Oh yeah, they're his grandson. So here's one of the things I recognize too, that I believe that the Western world, we'll just say, you know, Europe, by the time the Impressionists came along, had gotten so sick of the storytelling and the the bowing and scraping to the people with the cash, using your money, like the people, the way they talk about Sargent, the painter Sargent, too, sometimes in his portraits. And he was painting just for the rich folks. And but he was exquisite with his way of manipulating the paint. But he followed in this tradition that I think the whole beginnings of modern art started with. These people were just pissed off at the whole system that was all about, you better paint something from the Bible or paint a rich person or forget about it. You can't just express yourself. So I fully respect that. And I like to have that freedom too. When I paint by myself in my garage studio, I want to paint what I want to paint. And I was just painting some portraits last summer or the summer before the pandemic, right? So I want to so I just want to say that's one of the things for me that I really respect. Anybody gets to do what they want. And what really pissed me off when I was in school was this whole thing that because I'm fascinated by story, by mythology, that somehow, and I want to recreate that feeling that I have when I read a good story or hear a good story, that somehow that's me not being the very best that I can be as a creative person. And, I want to tweak these people by the nose, or just, say, adios, I don't need to invest my energy in that. I want to talk about, one of the things too, though, is that the interweaving, when you talk about Jackson Pollock, okay, who was this, in many ways, the American penultimate postmodernist painter that people most resonate with, when they're talking about postmodernism. Was he postmodern? Was he modernistic or post?
Well, you find his work more often like in the Museum of Modern Art, okay. But just like Picasso is a member of the Impressionists, but we never include him in that. We always think of him as his own thing. So I think Pollock has that same ability.
Okay. Big surprise to me when I learned that his teacher was one of the great muralists of the early part of the 19th century, Thomas Hart Benton.
Wow.
An illustrator.
Get a split screen and put those two.
You're going to be people. Like, how'd that happen? And, look that story up, because it's really fascinating. The way that Benton treated Jackson Pollock, the way I think, well, anyways, it's just a really fascinating story to me. And if you look at Benton's work too, it really is like he's telling the mythology of the Midwest of the United States in his murals, which are all over. Like if you go into, I don't know, Des Moines, into a public building there, you'll probably see a Thomas Hart Benton mural. He was really prolific, and he became the head of the, I think, the fine arts department at the Kansas School of Art. A big, I think it was that. Anyway, again, there's that mishmash of fine arts and illustration. They don't have to be mutually exclusive.
No.
But there is a thing I will say as an illustrator, and I'll finish with this, where it's really tempting to, say that I have limitations. I don't know how to create without the limitations of a contract. You get what I'm saying?
Sure.
Without somebody calling me up and saying, do this and I'll give you money, why should I make anything?
Yeah.
That can start to happen. It happens to me. Well, why should I make these things? But like, I know that you did the paintings for, what's that big open show that's in Grand Rapids?
Oh, yes, the Art Prize.
The Art Prize. And, I saw you install that whole really big, it's all of these, it was three-dimensional, it was all of these portraits. Do you think that there was any aspects of illustration in that project?
Absolutely. I think that project was all about illustration for me. And, thank God that I started teaching in the illustration program, because everything that I'm about now is a huge component of it is everything I learned teaching in that department. I learned so much from the students. And one of the things that I'll always remember, I took a trip to New York City with a friend who was an illustration graduate, and I was a fine arts graduate. And we sat in the Cloisters Museum in Upper Manhattan, a part of the Metropolitan Museum of Art that most people that visit New York for a short time, they're never going to get to this because it's so far out of the way. But it's worth going to. It's this beautiful building, and we're sitting and we decide we're going to sketch from this one particular thing for about an hour. And when you saw the amount that I had achieved on my page compared to my friend had this complete rendering done exquisitely in this 1 hour time. And I had like this much done of something, you know, and what it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like I studied, in fact, he gave me a copy of it just because he wanted to, but it was like the greatest gift because it opened up my eyes to see that, you know, through illustration, because the nature of illustration, the reason why we use that term is when you work commercially and you work for clients, you have deadlines. You got to get these things done. Not that Michelangelo didn't have a big client in the Pope and he had things that he had to get done, but let's just face it, they gave the guy 5 years to get this thing done. You and I, if we were called by, you know, Joe Blow, they'd say 5 weeks. You get 5 days.
Yeah.
And you have to crank it out. So how do you find this happy medium? Well, it just kicked me in the booty. It opened me up. It helped me to understand. And I just posted on Instagram 3 videos, and each video is 50 seconds. 2 of them are figures. 1 is a skull. And I labeled it 50-second figure, 50-second skull, because it's my way of sort of promoting how much you can do in a short period of time, but yet it can be so good. So Robert Henry, the great American artist, he said in his book, The Art Spirit, he said, some artists say in 12 strokes what it takes other artists to say in 1,000 strokes. Yeah. And I think that's such a poignant statement, because when you take really, really amazing illustrators like yourself, you're doing that. You're putting down the lines that matter. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So one of the artists,
and that can be a day-to-day thing too. You know, when you're on a good day, you whittle it down, and then on a not so good day, it could take like 1,500.
And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that what I love about the realm of illustration and sort of what it brings to the table is that it gives you this other chance to really step up and challenge yourself in a way that I think, you know, if you look at the movie Girl with a Pearl Earring and Vermeer, and, you know, come on, those paintings, they were done over long periods of time. Hey, that's nice. But there are great paintings that didn't take that long. Right. You know, if you look at Norman Rockwell's work, and I saw it up close, how exquisite it was. And let's just say that, you know, he had deadlines. He was doing these covers for the Saturday Evening Post, and you know, he's not being given months and months. Right. He's probably cranking out a cover every week, I would think. So you know, when you see his work and you hold it up next to a Vermeer, I'm satisfied.
And along those same lines, we got a couple of minutes here, but who was the outdoor painter? You know, I think his name is Fairey. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, the guy that paints the Andre the Giant.
Yes. Now, yes. I mean, those
Shepard Fairey.
Yeah. So there's a guy. He does. I don't know what his process is. It doesn't look like it takes him 5 years. Right. But they have a power to them that is really valid, you know, and that's what people are responding to. So he does something in 15 minutes. Somebody else needs to take, you know, 15 weeks. Oh, okay. It's about, to me, the intention and the desire.
Yeah.
Do you really intend to make something wonderful? And are you going to go for it? You know, if it takes 15 weeks, are you going to stick with it? You know, am I going to stick with it?
Yeah. Well, then, maybe our next discussion, we can talk about design and what design means to what we're doing, because I love what you just said, thinking about Shepard Fairey's work, which I think is very designy. And good design is good design is good design. Good drawing is good drawing is good. Good painting is good paint. Like any of those things in their truest sense of the word, if they're done properly and very well, no matter how long or short or colorful or, detailed or not detailed, sparse, whatever. If they're done well, they're done well. And we recognize that. Even the non-artists can figure this out when they see it and they gravitate towards it.
All right. So next week we're going to talk about, what was that thing again? What's the topic?
I just think how does design play into what you and I do?
After that, I want to talk about derivative work, using other people's artwork to influence yours, or tracing photographs of the photos that other people have taken. Where does that work and not work so much?
Okay.
I think that'd be a good subject too. All right.
Yeah.
We're going over time here, but great. I really enjoy doing this with you, Eugene. I hope other people are getting a kick out of it too. We're going to give a class. We're going to give a class called Creature Creation or Character Creation, something like that. You see it in the stuff written down underneath here, the link for that page. We'll tell you all about, it's coming up. It's going to be in March. It's just 4 classes, right?
Right.
And over a 2-week period. Check out that link, click on it, see if what do you want to say about it, Eugene? Is it going to be fun?
I just want to say that if your ears perk up when you hear Matt bringing up this idea of taking a class with the two of us, then you definitely should sign up, because this is going to be what people are going to be talking about for years to come. Remember those classes that Eugene and Matt put together?
I was
and how lucky we were to have been part of that.
Yeah. And and also, it doesn't matter how old you are. If you're in high school thinking about going to design school, if you're in design school, if you're not in design school, if you wanted to go to design school, if you thought, you know what, I could do this drawing thing, we're good with all of that. It doesn't matter if you're, retired, or I think that the lowest age we said was like 14 or something like that, so definitely, like Eugene said, if this is like a bell ringing, you hear this and you're like, I got to do this, give yourself the gift, click on this thing and take a look at it, because we've done this before. This is college level material, right? And you're going to get your money's worth in this. So check it out.
And check out mattfaulkner.com, because that's a good place where you can contact both of us.
Right. That's right. Okay.
So there we go.
Are we good?
All right.
All right. What's the closing theme song?
The world is always better with more art in it. So we always say, go out and make some art.
Yep.
And Matt, while you say the closing remarks, I'll play the theme song.
Okay. So this is Matt Faulkner, illustrator, artist, and this is Eugene Clark,
of great art to talk about,
and sometimes illustrator, saying, you should head on out, save your world, save somebody else's world, and just make some art.
Hi, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.